Ever wondered what happens when a fighter jet falls from the sky and suddenly disappears? When 20 tons of metal, fuel, and explosives hits the ground at 500 miles per hour, what follows is a cascade of events most people never see. We're talking about investigations that cost millions, careers that end in seconds, and technology so sensitive that recovery teams sometimes destroy it themselves rather than let it fall into the wrong hands. The crash is just the beginning. What happens in the minutes, hours, and days after tells a story about how militaries protect their secrets, how they find the truth, and what they're willing to sacrifice to get it. So stick around, because what you're about to learn will change how you see every military aircraft that flies overhead. The moment a fighter jet impacts the ground, a series of automatic systems activate that most civilians have no idea exist. Modern military aircraft are equipped with emergency locator transmitters that start broadcasting the instant they detect a crash. These aren't your standard distress beacons. They transmit on military frequencies that are monitored 24/7 by satellite networks and ground stations positioned around the globe. Within seconds, the crash location gets triangulated to within a few hundred feet. Command centers light up with alerts. Duty officers start making calls. Search and rescue teams get scrambled from the nearest base. And if the jet went down in hostile or contested territory, those rescue teams are coming in armed and ready for a fight. But here's what makes this time window absolutely critical. Fighter jets carry classified technology. The radar systems, the avionics, the electronic warfare equipment, and especially the communications gear are all designed with proprietary technology that adversaries would pay fortunes to acquire. Every second that wreckage sits unguarded is a second that sensitive equipment could be compromised. That's why the military has protocols for what they call deny operations. If a jet goes down in enemy territory and there's any chance hostile forces will reach it first, the standing order is often to destroy the wreckage from the air. We're talking about follow-up airstrikes on your own aircraft. The Air Force would rather blow a $90 million F-35 into unrecognizable pieces than let its stealth technology get studied by foreign engineers. And if the pilot ejected and survived, the first 60 seconds determine whether they live or die. Ejection seats are marvels of engineering that can save lives, but they're also violent. Pilots experience forces between 12 and 20 Gs during ejection. That's enough to compress spines, crack vertebrae, and cause serious injury, even when everything works perfectly. Some pilots black out from the acceleration alone. The seat fires explosive bolts that blow the canopy off. Then rocket motors launch the pilot clear of the aircraft. In modern jets like the F-16 or F-18, the whole sequence takes less than 2 seconds. But those 2 seconds turn your body into a projectile. Pilots have been known to eject successfully, only to die from injuries sustained during the ejection itself. The Martin Baker ejection seats used in many Western fighters have saved over 7,600 lives since their introduction, but they've also caused permanent injuries to hundreds of pilots. Compression fractures in the spine are common. Some pilots end up shorter after ejection because their vertebrae get compressed. Others suffer from chronic back pain for the rest of their lives.
To this day, I can remember my body position when I went out because it snapped me back to the right. It was taking the air out of my lungs. So it was like you fell out of a tree and got the wind knocked out of you type of thing. The whole thing was less than 9 seconds from recognition to in the water.
So while rescue choppers are spinning up and command posts are tracking the beacon, there's a pilot on the ground who might be unconscious, injured, or under fire. The clock is ticking, and every decision made in these first 60 seconds ripples through everything that follows. The difference between a successful rescue and a tragedy often comes down to response time measured in minutes. If the crash happens over water, the survival challenges multiply. Pilots carry survival gear, including life rafts, but hypothermia can set in within 30 minutes in cold water. The Navy has documented cases where pilots survived the crash and the ejection only to drown before rescue teams could reach them. That's why carrier strike groups always have rescue helicopters on alert status, fueled and ready to launch within 5 minutes of any distress call. Once the location is confirmed, the race to secure the wreckage begins. This isn't some casual investigation team showing up with clipboards. The military sends in what's called a crash recovery team, and these folks operate more like a SWAT unit than accident investigators. For crashes on domestic soil, the response is swift but methodical. Security forces establish a perimeter immediately. We're talking armed personnel, barriers, and in some cases, entire roads get shut down. Nobody gets in without clearance, and that includes local law enforcement, fire departments, and definitely the media. The military controls the site completely. The first priority is always safety. Jet fuel doesn't just burn, it explodes. A fully fueled fighter can carry anywhere from 7,000 to 18,000 pounds of JP-8 fuel. And if that ignites, you're looking at a fireball that can melt steel and cook off any unexploded ordnance the jet was carrying. Crash recovery teams approach with foam trucks, hazmat suits, and explosive ordnance disposal specialists who check for live weapons. Because yes, these jets often crash while armed. Training missions use live missiles. Combat air patrols carry full weapon loads. An F-16 can carry AIM 120 missiles, each with a 40-pound warhead. Those don't always explode on impact. Sometimes they just sit there in the wreckage, unstable and ready to detonate if disturbed. The EOD teams work methodically. They use specialized equipment to detect explosives and approach any suspected ordnance with extreme caution. If they find a live weapon, they have two options. They can attempt to render it safe, which involves carefully disarming the fusing mechanisms, or they can conduct a controlled detonation right there at the crash site. The decision depends on the location and the risk level. In populated areas, they'll take the time to disarm it. In remote locations, they'll just blow it up. Once the immediate dangers are addressed, the documentation begins. Every piece of debris gets photographed from multiple angles. Teams create detailed maps showing where each fragment landed. This matters because debris fields tell stories. The pattern of wreckage reveals whether the jet broke apart in flight or hit the ground intact. It shows the angle of impact, the speed, and sometimes even what the pilot was trying to do in those final moments. A jet that breaks apart in midair creates a debris field that can stretch for miles. Components separate based on their weight and aerodynamic properties. Heavy pieces like the engine fall relatively straight down. Lighter pieces like panels and fairings can drift for miles on the wind. Investigators map all of it because the distribution pattern reveals what failed first and how the aircraft came apart. For international crashes, especially in hostile territory, the procedures get infinitely more complex. When a US F-15 went down in Libya in 2016, recovery teams had to coordinate with ground forces to reach the site. They couldn't risk the wreckage being captured, so they worked fast. Within hours, they'd stripped the aircraft of sensitive components and destroyed what they couldn't remove. The classified equipment gets packaged separately and flown out under armed guard. We're talking about radar modules, computer systems, and communication devices that contain encryption codes and software algorithms worth billions in research and development. These components get transported in sealed containers under continuous armed escort until they reach secure facilities back in the United States. The rest of the wreckage eventually gets transported to investigation facilities, but not before every serial number is logged, every component is accounted for, and every piece of technology is either recovered or confirmed destroyed. The military doesn't lose track of its secrets, even when they're scattered across a mile of desert or jungle. Transport aircraft like the C-130 or C-17 get tasked with hauling the wreckage back to bases where hangars have been cleared specifically for the investigation. After the site is secure and the wreckage is collected, the real detective work begins. The Air Force Safety Investigation Board takes over, and these investigations are exhaustive. We're not talking about a few guys looking at some bent metal. These are teams of engineers, pilots, maintenance experts, and human factors specialists who spend months reconstructing exactly what happened. They start with what's called the maintenance records. Every fighter jet has a complete service history documenting every flight hour, every repair, every part replacement, and every inspection. Investigators pull these records and look for patterns. Was there a recurring issue that got overlooked? Did a part fail earlier than expected? Were there any deviations from standard procedures? Each aircraft has what's called a Form 781, which is basically a diary of everything that's been done to that specific jet since it rolled off the production line. Maintenance crews log every action, no matter how minor. Investigators go through these forms looking for anything unusual. Maybe the same hydraulic pump was replaced 3 times in 6 months. Maybe a pilot reported an anomaly that was signed off as cannot duplicate. These details matter. Then they examine the physical evidence. Wreckage gets transported to specialized facilities where technicians reassemble the aircraft piece by piece. They're literally building a 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle from thousands of fragments. Metal gets analyzed for fatigue cracks. Engine components get inspected for signs of failure. Hydraulic lines get checked for leaks. Every system gets scrutinized. The engine receives special attention because engine failure is one of the most common causes of fighter jet crashes. Turbine blades get examined under microscopes looking for stress fractures. Fuel nozzles get checked for blockages. Bearing surfaces get analyzed for wear patterns. If a blade broke off and punctured the engine casing, investigators can tell from the damage pattern whether it failed due to fatigue, foreign object damage, or manufacturing defect. Modern fighters also carry multiple data recorders. These aren't like the black boxes on commercial aircraft. Military data recorders capture hundreds of parameters every second: engine performance, control surface positions, cockpit switch settings, G-forces, airspeed, altitude, weapons status, and radio communications all get logged continuously. Investigators download this data and analyze it frame by frame. They can see exactly what the pilot did, what the aircraft did in response, and whether those responses were normal. If an engine failed, the data shows when and how. If a control surface jammed, it's right there in the numbers. If the pilot made an error, that shows up too. The data gets fed into simulators that can recreate the exact flight conditions. Test pilots then fly those scenarios to see if they can reproduce the problem or determine what recovery actions might have worked. Sometimes they discover that the pilot did everything right, but the situation was simply unrecoverable. Other times they find that a different control input at a critical moment might have saved the aircraft. But here's where investigations get really interesting. Not all crashes have obvious causes. Sometimes the evidence points in multiple directions. Sometimes systems interact in unexpected ways. The F-22 Raptor had a series of incidents where pilots experienced hypoxia-like symptoms. Investigators spent years trying to figure out why. The data showed the oxygen system was functioning normally, but pilots were still experiencing cognitive impairment. It took dozens of test flights, extensive engineering analysis, and input from physiologists before they finally traced the problem to a vest that pilots wore. The vest provided G-force protection, but also restricted breathing in ways that became dangerous at high altitudes. The fix required redesigning equipment and changing procedures across the entire F-22 fleet. These investigations don't just identify what went wrong. They generate recommendations that prevent future crashes. Numbers and technical reports don't capture the full weight of what happens when a fighter jet crashes. Behind every incident is a pilot, and behind that pilot is a family waiting for news. When a crash occurs, notification teams visit the pilot's home. These aren't phone calls. The military sends officers in dress uniform to deliver the news in person. If the pilot didn't survive, those officers stay with the family, answer questions, and coordinate support services. If the pilot survived but is injured, they provide updates and arrange transportation so family members can reach the hospital. The casualty assistance officer assigned to the family becomes their primary point of contact for everything that follows. They help navigate benefits, arrange memorial services if needed, and provide updates on the investigation. For families dealing with the loss of a pilot, this support can last for months or even years as they work through insurance claims, survivor benefits, and the emotional aftermath. The career implications implications for surviving pilots are significant. Every crash triggers not just a safety investigation, but also a separate mishap investigation that determines whether human error played a role. Pilots face review boards. They get questioned about their decisions, their training, and their actions leading up to the crash. Even when cleared of wrongdoing, many pilots struggle with the psychological aftermath. Post-traumatic stress is real for pilots who survive crashes. Some develop anxiety about flying. Others experience survivor's guilt, especially if other crew members didn't make it. The military provides psychological counseling, but the culture of fighter aviation doesn't always encourage pilots to seek help. There's pressure to appear tough, to get back in the cockpit, to prove the crash didn't break you. Flight surgeons conduct medical evaluations before a pilot can return to flight status. They check for physical injuries, sure, but they also assess mental readiness. Some pilots never fly again, not because they're prohibited, but because they can't overcome the psychological barrier. The Air Force has documented cases where highly skilled pilots with years of experience walked away from flying after a single crash. There's also the financial reality. A single F-35 costs about $80 million. An F-22 runs closer to $150 million when you factor in development costs. When one of these aircraft crashes, taxpayers are covering a loss equivalent to the annual budget of a small town. Congress gets briefed. Journalists start asking questions. Public scrutiny follows. The Government Accountability Office tracks these losses. In the past decade, the U.S. military has lost over 50 fighter jets to crashes during peacetime operations. That's billions of dollars in hardware, not counting the cost of investigations, cleanup operations, and replacement aircraft. Each incident generates reports that go to congressional committees responsible for defense oversight. For the ground crews who maintain the aircraft, a crash brings intense pressure. The quality assurance inspectors who certified the maintenance work face particularly intense scrutiny. Their job is to catch mistakes before an aircraft flies. If they missed something that contributed to a crash, they carry that weight. Defense contractors whose components failed face investigations too. If an engine manufacturer's part is found to be defective, they can face lawsuits, contract penalties, and damage to their reputation. The entire supply chain gets examined when something goes wrong at 40,000 feet. Fighter jet crashes reveal a side of military aviation most people never consider. The technology, the procedures, the investigations, and the human stories all intersect in ways that are both fascinating and sobering. What do you think is the most critical aspect of crash response? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this look behind the scenes compelling, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden world of military operations. Thanks for watching.